We all have fond memories of our childhoods. Many of us recall staying with our grandparents, being spoiled by grandma and doted over by grandpa. Maybe you went on adventures on their old land. Maybe you wondered what secrets they kept in that ancient house. While maybe some of us remember realizing what kind of terror lurked in the world after witnessing their first horrors at their grandparents'. Today, I have 5 allegedly true horror stories that happened on your grandparents' land. Your childhood will never be the same. If you have a scary story that you'd like to share, send it over at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for scary Discord stories. Now then, let's begin. The Old Man in the Forest, from AcheronAlex. Location unknown. This happened a long time ago when I was 12. I lived with my grandparents in their village. We had a cow and an ox. Usually the bull would take all the cattle to graze at night and would take them back. These cows knew where to go when going home. My grandpa had a male ox, and since my father was an adult and he wasn't there, I took the responsibility. So my chore was to go around the village, with the ox trailing after me, calling the people to open their doors. Our ox would grunt to call the herd and all the females would come out. From then on, I would take them to a clearing up the mountain, and then later take them to the river. It was easy, kind of fun too. The animals already knew where they were going, and they were calm, and the bull was a gentle giant. I would often ride him too, using a thin rope on his horns. And if any of the females wandered off, which was pretty rare, you just had to poke her with a stick in the right direction. And my grandpa warned that if I saw any rare boar or fox in the woods, that I should stay on the ox, because most animals dared not go near an ox herd. Most, that is. There's a dark part of the woods where it is very quiet, and even the bravest hunters don't go. It's very slippery and dangerous there. They said that even the deer and boar stray away from it. I was forbidden to go there myself, and honestly never wanted to. It was an early morning and everything seemed fine. I was on the ox going up the mountain. I was glad he let me because it was a hard trek up. I suddenly saw one of the females wandering off, so I followed her and left our ox and the dogs to guide the herd. She went in the forest. I ran over to her, got on top of her and tied my rope to her horns. I tried to steer her away, but oddly enough, she continued. She wandered into the dark part and then stopped. I didn't want to get off in case she ran back and left me there. But then I heard a crunch and turned around. A very old-looking man was walking towards us. He looked frail with dirty clothes and a long beard. I was scared, so I stayed on top of the ox, laying flat against her and clinging to her, not wanting to fall in case she ran. Oxen aren't like bulls. They don't jump and kick when scared. They either attack with their horns and trample or run. I was ready to hold on for dear life no matter what she chose. Our oxen especially do not take kindly to strangers before I took them out. They had to be slowly introduced. But these oxen trusted me. I was waiting for the ox to either attack or bolt, but she continued to just stand there. The old stranger came up to us and patted the ox on the head, whispering something in her ear that I didn't understand. Then he looked at me, and I saw then that his eyes were completely white. No pupil, no iris. After a moment or two, he turned around and walked away, disappearing in the trees. Suddenly, the female grunted as if she had just awakened. They do this noise every morning when they wake up. Then she bolted the way we came from. We found the herd soon enough. I quickly got back on the lead ox and yelled water. He knew that command and went down towards the river. There were houses there, and it was closer than home. I ran into one of the houses and tried to explain to the people there. The couple there stayed with me and sent their daughter to call my grandpa. I couldn't sleep for days remembering those solid white eyes. My grandpa did not let me out of the house or out of the garden, and I wasn't allowed near trees for a while. This was because I later learned that they were protecting me from the Lesnik. It is a forest spirit, which is said to take the form of a man, an owl, or a wolf. It absolutely hates people going into his part of the woods and will often kidnap children. I later learned that the ox which took me there had fallen ill very suddenly and perished. It sometimes stays in the trees as an owl looking for the offender, and for years when I went to my grandparents, they would not let me be alone. Not just outside, but inside too. I'm never going into those woods again. Demon outside my home. From Jade Speedster. Location, Virginia. I live in the southwestern side of Virginia, near the Appalachian Mountains, in a small historical town called Abingdon. We have our fair share of hauntings here, between the Martha Washington Inn and the Barter Theater, and the supposed ghost hours outside on the grounds of the Martha. I still have yet to take the haunted tour there, but this story is about my home, a small barn house on a back road going from Abingdon to Glade Springs. This is where I used to live. It used to be a log cabin before the owner added more onto the place. When we rented it from the landlord, they had recently painted it and were cleaning it up. It's set near a small hill where this old concrete barn was that was already being rented out to some people who had cattle. The driveway wasn't long, but about a good 10 to 15 feet. It was on flat road that surrounded the two pastures before you pulled around the first small curve to the large elder oak at the back of the house. Our yard was about the size of a normal trailer long ways in the front, and along the sides about half the size of a trailer long ways. It was a big house, 2 stories with an attic, which we had to seal off due to birds and bees. Anyway, I shared a room with my sisters on the left side of the house when they moved in when I was 10 years old or more. I lived with my grandparents, and when we moved into this place from day one, I noticed that something was off. The house had a foreboding feeling when the sun went down. Inside was fine when you were off the back or front porch at night. It felt like a normal home. It was nice and warm and inviting inside, but outside after dark, things felt uneasy and even sickening. That feeling you get when you're being watched, but you can't pinpoint where the eyes are coming from. I hated it as a kid and teen to go outside after dark. It was because of this feeling I avoided the back porch and front porch at night, especially by myself, like the plague. Also, I avoided the windows at night, even with the lights on. It felt like something was glaring at you. Not a comforting feeling, to say the least. I also hated, with emphasis on the hate, camping outside during family reunions, mostly on the left side of the house. There was a rock on the left side of the house, and there was something definitely wrong about it. This was the side where my grandfather often found little things, like glass bottles and various items buried in the dirt. Nothing scary like bones, but just items that were strange to say the least. But it was always on that side. The rock, as I stated, was on that side as well, and being around it even during the day made you feel terrified for some reason. Standing on it made you feel like there were electric currents going up your spine, and you would almost instinctively get off of it. I hated sitting on it alone and often avoided that side of the house altogether. But one day when a friend was over, I was a bit more courageous. We were sitting on this rock talking about a friend of hers that went to another school. Suddenly, crows began to gather on the trees around us. We left and they followed us all around the house and driveway, no matter where we went. At first, we thought it was funny, joking about it, but it was uneasy enough that we went inside the house. Maybe it was a weird coincidence, but it was still very strange. After I turned 10, I was living with my parents, but after a time my mom had to leave me with my grandparents until she could come back to live with us. After we moved, I talked to my stepdad about the place, and he confirmed that the place did not feel right, especially at night. He told me a story of when he was on the front porch, and he heard a low humanoid growl from that side of the house when he was smoking. My dad is a military guy. He's tough to scare, tougher even to startle, so upon hearing this sound, he ran to check with a flashlight nearby, but found nothing. He always told me that the place gave him the creeps. One night when I woke up to head downstairs to the bathroom, I had to pass over 4 windows, and the entire time it felt like something was following me from window to window. The main hall windows were square and started at your waist and went upward. Not surprisingly, they led to the front porch. Every time you passed them, you wanted to run as fast as possible to get away from those windows. Now these stories might just be us teens and kids being paranoid, but this last part is the most chilling. It was spring nearing fall time. It was dark outside. My middle sister was in the kitchen and I was on the sectional couch. I was on my laptop. My little sister was on the other couch near the door to the kitchen. My dad was a seat away from me watching TV and my grandmother was near the TV on the right-hand side on her computer playing games. I remember typing out a reply to a friend of mine online and getting up to get something to snack on. My grandmother also got up to go use the bathroom when she suddenly screamed. She pointed and said, "Someone's outside." My dad sprung to action, and my grandfather must have heard the yelling after my dad went out. My grandmother shouted that it was a black shadowy figure. They were standing in the yard staring inside. At the time, we had a large overhead light screwed into the telephone pole outside, casting a bright white light in the yard. It lit up everything, no matter where you were standing outside. So the fact that this thing was black still. It may have been humanoid, but it definitely wasn't human. When they went outside, they saw the black figure crouching behind the picnic table my grandfather made, which was even closer to the light source, yet still there were no details to be made out of this person. I think my dad said it was just a black form. When my grandmother yelled again and my dad saw him, they said the figure darted over the fence. When my dad and grandfather pursued him, they found no one. No one running down the hill besides the fact that it would have been obvious. There was nowhere to hide. The grass was short and everything was out in the open. It was impossible for this figure to have gotten away that fast. They searched for half an hour or so, but found no one. This also happened a second time, and still even that time we found no one. My grandmother, finding something to explain it, said that it must have been some kids from our neighbors playing a prank. However, given everything I've told you, I find that hard to believe. What human could jump over a fence like that, hide and run so quickly, be blacker than the night in the middle of the light? My dad said to me when I asked him about it after we moved that he thinks the place might have been on native land, that something dark and evil was on it. As for me, it was all these encounters that have me sleeping with my curtains always closed. For now, I'm glad I moved away. That place just isn't right. The Cabin Guest, from AmmeJeanRomeo. Location, Scotland. I'm a 20-something girl and the youngest sibling of 4. This story took place 2 summers ago. My brothers and I had gone to stay with our grandparents who lived on a farm a few miles outside of Aberdeen, Scotland. We hadn't seen them in person for over 20 years. We arrived at the farm late in the afternoon. My grandparents lived in the main house, which was surrounded by farmland, which was itself surrounded by dense woodland, and at the edge of that woodland stood a cabin my granddad referred to as simply the cabin. It wasn't really a cabin though, it was a brick building with a living room, small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. He would often rent it out to some of the workers, but it was currently unoccupied. The main house only had 3 bedrooms, so 2 of us had to stay at the cabin. I actually jumped at the idea. Living in a cabin in the middle of the woods, we could start a fire outside and tell ghost stories. The youngest of my 3 brothers also decided to room in the cabin with me. That night after dinner, my brother Liam and I made our way over to the cabin. The sun was starting to set and Liam was joking around, saying, "What if we run into a monster?" I laughed along with him, stating that if he fell as we ran away from the monster, I would just leave him behind. We soon made it to the cabin. Liam unlocked the door and we walked inside. We bid each other good night, then headed to our respective rooms. Mine was on the back of the building, where there was a large uncurtained window providing a spectacular view of the rapidly darkening forest. I pulled some pajamas from my suitcase and got ready for bed. A few minutes later, I crawled in and got cozy, feeling really tired after having sat on a train for 4 hours and then an hour-long car ride to finish it off. It was all catching up to me. I must have fallen asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow, as the next thing I knew I was being awakened by a rhythmic tapping sound, a tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then a beat of silence followed by another 3 taps. My sleep-muddled brain took a few moments to process what I had heard. The noise came again. Tap, tap, tap. Now I was properly awake, my eyes wide, wondering where the noise was coming from. The tapping continued. I looked to the window, seeing if I could see the source of the noise. Nothing was there. Tap, tap, tap. I jumped out of the bed and darted to my brother's room. I banged on his door until he let me in. He swung the door open, looking ready to shout at me for waking him up. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I stuttered a reply. Something's outside my window." Liam pushed past me and went to investigate. He went over to the window and peered outside. Tap, tap. A shrill scream echoed from outside and Liam jumped back, falling onto the floor. The cry came a second time and the glass of the window rattled dangerously. Liam jumped to his feet and pushed me back out the room, slamming the door behind us. Even with a thick wooden door between us, we could still hear the screeching thing and the ferocious rattling of the window. Liam grabbed me by my arm and pulled me into the living room, telling me to stay low and quiet. He pulled out his phone and frantically called my granddad. The phone rang about 10 times before Liam threw it on the floor in frustration. The screaming was beginning to quiet down and we no longer could hear the glass shaking. We shared a look and with a nod headed back to my room. We waited until the screaming had finally stopped and with a shaky hand, I turned the door handle and opened the door. Liam followed closely behind. The room was now silent and by some miracle the glass was still intact. I heaved a shaky sigh of relief and I turned back to Liam only to find him staring into the open doorway with a look of abject horror on his face. I followed his eyeline, my own face draining of color soon. There stood a young woman, long blonde hair dangling in knotty tangles over her face. She was dressed in a dark blue dress and her feet were bare, covered in mud. Her hands, that were at first laying limply at her sides, slowly raised and reached out towards me. Her head whipped back, and she cried out, "Give him back." With this, she leapt forward and vanished through the bedroom window. The 2 of us sat there in absolute shock. What in the world did we just see? Was that actually a ghost? After a few more moments had passed, I slumped to the floor. Liam scooted over to me and pulled me into a hug. I could feel his heart racing a mile a minute. Or maybe that was mine. We didn't sleep that night. We camped out in the living room watching TV without really processing what we saw, too afraid of the dark to go back to the main house yet. And lucky for us, we did not see any more of that spirit. When the light came up, we went back to the main house. We ran all the way there and told our parents and brothers what had happened. Of course, our brothers didn't believe us, but my granddad gave us a sad look and told us a story of what happened on that land. 20 years ago, a woman and her unborn baby had been found in the woods. They were no longer alive. Turns out her husband, in a fit of temper, had struck her over the head, and she had perished. He buried her with their unborn child in the woods, next to a cabin he himself had built 3 years prior. As frightened as I was about what had happened, I couldn't help but feel pity for the poor young woman and her baby. I didn't step foot back in that cabin for the remainder of our trip. After that incident, I hoped never to see or hear about a ghost ever again. The Nurse, from Krystal. Location: unknown. When I was little, I went out to my dad's every other weekend. He lived on my grandparents' farm in a trailer. My room was in the very back. It had a bay window, but no seat, but my bed was alongside it, giving me a view of the field between my dad's house and my grandparents' house. I never slept well in that room. It always gave me anxiety, like someone was going to come up and stare at me through the big windows, not to mention the woods on the left side that held God knows what. The last night I spent in that room, I had an experience that I didn't talk about for years. I had just laid down for bed, forcing myself to dismiss the odd silhouettes of coyotes and deer in the field close to the window. I was 7 at the time, and my dad and grandparents tried to convince me it was all in my head, just my imagination, and to picture things that made me happy instead. So I tried that. I apparently fell asleep for a time, but something jolted me awake. I hadn't had any dreams that I could remember, but I just had this feeling wash over me, a bad one. I looked around the room and nothing was there, and the few shadows I swore danced around the room made me close my eyes, and I just kept telling myself it's all in my head. But the feeling of fear only got stronger. And so I opened my eyes, now scanning the windows for anything weird. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, and my blood ran cold. As I turned my head to verify what I was looking at, she only came closer and closer, and soon, there beside my bed in full view, was a nurse, a cart with medical instruments on it with her, and this time it was not my imagination. I lay there frozen, trying to make out her features. She was slightly transparent, though I can still remember how she looked. She wore a white 50s-style nurse uniform, and her hair was short, curly, and light brown. I stayed there, analyzing her for what seemed like forever. So surely, if it was just my imagination, she would have gone away by now, right? But then she spoke. "Now, hold still." Her voice sounded soft and reassuring, but I was confused. Hold still for what? Then she grabbed a syringe off the cart. I don't think I ever jumped so fast in my life. I jolted up, then I ran through the bedroom door. I immediately went to my dad in tears, who was obviously rather annoyed for me waking him up at around 3 a.m. As he proclaimed his annoyance, I tried to explain again and again what I saw. When he finally relented, we went back to check, and she was of course no longer there, but I refused to stay in that room. From that day forward, I slept in the living room on the couch, and that didn't change. Later on, my mom, stepdad, sisters, a couple of cousins, and I were in the dining room sharing our paranormal experiences because why not? I learned a lot that day, to say the least, about things I never spoke of. It was honestly a surprise that when I told them my story of the nurse, my mom looked surprised herself. She explained that an old nursing home owned the entire lot my grandparents' farm was on now, but it had burnt down in the 80s. My aunt said that the lot was filled with trailers, and the place where my dad's trailer was used to be the owner's, who was a nurse back in the day. She passed away nearly on the same spot, too. Talk about creepy. Creepy things from when I was little. From Kendall S. Location: unknown. I was around 6 years old at the time. My parents were divorced, so I was at my father's house. He lived with my grandparents at the time, but I had my own room. One night I was asleep in my room, and I suddenly woke up. I hadn't been jerked awake, but I was suddenly just conscious and aware of my surroundings. The first thing I heard was my voice saying, "Wait," and as I opened my eyes, they adjusted to the minimal light. I noticed I was on my back and my arm was lifted toward the ceiling, like I was reaching for someone. After a few seconds, my arm fell to my side. I tried to speak as effortlessly as I had when I woke up, but it didn't work. My voice came out scratchy, as a tired voice usually does. I didn't think any more of it afterwards and went back to sleep. Now, I don't think I was dreaming, because I don't remember any dream before or after this happened. But I might have been, I just don't know. When I was 11 or 12, I had gone to bed again, and I was drifting off. For some reason, as I drifted to sleep, my brain was thinking of my father's dogs, Shorty and Buddy, who are both Chihuahua Dachshund hybrids. They had been barking in a playful way. I was half asleep with their barks playing through my head when suddenly I heard a scream in place of one of the barks. I also felt a little breeze blow past my face like someone was screaming right at me. I jerked awake and looked around, but the scream was gone, as was the source of it. No one else in the house was screaming, and no one was in my room. Let's just say it took me a long time to get back to sleep. Now for the most recent part. A couple of weeks ago, I was at my father's house for the summer. I was talking to my friend on the phone late one night, and I was getting myself something to snack on. It's a bad habit of mine. I had just closed the refrigerator when my father laughed. I called out to him what he was laughing at, but he did not reply. At the time, I wasn't sure where he was exactly, so I went to check our back porch. He wasn't there. Then I went to his room and he was nowhere to be found. His bathroom was empty too. This really creeped me out, and when I finally found him and told him about it the next day, he thought it was weird too. He doesn't even remember laughing. Some pretty strange things happen there, and it's enough to leave me thinking a little too much when I'm having trouble sleeping. When you grow older, you get more experiences under your belt. Good ones, hard ones, bad ones, and even creepy ones. Age brings with it wisdom, and it also brings respect to the things you should fear. And sometimes you end up knowing too much. Our grandparents have weathered years of horror, but they hide it well. The next time you see your grandparents, be sure to ask them what their most horrifying experience was, or what their most unexplained moment has been. I'm sure you'll be terrified at what you hear. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you've got a story of your own, you can share it with us at darknessprevails.org. You can support the show as well by going to patreon.com/darknessprevails to donate, or you can consider buying our merchandise at teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails. Thank you. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous full video about 6 real encounters with the Goat Man. Kate McGinty says, I used to babysit for the Goat Man. That's weird. Did you have to stop him from doing constant goat things? What does a baby goat man eat? Kate, I have plenty of questions. Dana Cardota says, you should do another animated horror story video. I'd love to, but my wallet screams out in pain every time I even think about it. One day, Dana, one day. Country Girl says, I have goats. Well, time to get scared every time I see one of them at night. Oh, you don't have anything to worry about. Until they start walking on two legs, that is. Krabby Scrappy says, Jake, are you there? Jake from State Farm? That man is always there when you need him. And Matt Yellowhorse says, I'll be doing an investigation at Goatman Bridge in Denton. I don't know when, but it's gonna be exciting. I've got two things to say. Good luck, and RIP. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way real soon. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.